Welcome everyone to Black History Month at Meetup. We are going to have an amazing discussion today with two of our amazing Meetup community organizers. Welcome. I'm going to go through a little bit of the agenda and some of the guidelines for our discussion, and then we are going to hop right in. All right, so just for everyone's information, this event is being recorded. You will not appear in the video. All of your audio will be muted. And if you have questions, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A function that you will see on Zoom. And closed captioning is available. If you turn it on, to turn it on, you're gonna click on the live transcription icon at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. We are going to spend about 5 minutes in an introduction. We are going to dive into discussion with Calvin and Amy, and then we will have Q&A from our awesome audience. So I will quit sharing my screen, and we are going to jump in to some of our questions. Oh no, I'm sorry. We are going to jump into, of course, our introduction. So let me pull that up. All right, so I want to introduce myself first. My name is Eliza Mejia. I'm the Director of People here at Meetup. Today, we're going to be speaking with Calvin Brown from our Black Men Coding Meetup Group and Amy Afua from our W.O.K.E Women of Color Empowered Meetup Group. And we're going to learn more about their experiences as Meetup community organizers and how they've kept their members engaged. And I will take just a couple of moments to introduce our panelists. Calvin Brown is a tech professional, entrepreneur, author, and philanthropist, originally from Mississippi. He left the countryside to enter the big world of technology, and after 24 years of IT experience, he has been crowned the #Software King. In 2002, Calvin founded Kolour Consulting, a successful software consultancy business based in Atlanta and LA. Kolour Consulting helps companies run smarter and faster by building products that we all use daily. He has also helped to cultivate 1,000+ professional Black men and women in tech with the Black Men Coding Meetup Group. He has 2 daughters who are the ages of 10 and 18. Welcome, Calvin.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Amy Afua Smith, and she is a licensed clinical social worker. Ms. Smith witnessed mental health challenges and access with marginalized communities in her practice. Ms. Smith created a support group called W.O.K.E, Women of Color Empowered. W.O.K.E is a monthly meetup for women of color to discuss mental health awareness, relationships, and current events. W.O.K.E started in February of 2018, and to date, W.O.K.E has 1,500 members in the tri-state area. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to jump right into some questions. So we love to do this at Meetup, and we even do it in our all hands meeting as a company. We love to hear your Meetup story. So Calvin, if you can kick us off, how long have you been on Meetup? When did you become an organizer? And how long have you become an organizer? I'm sorry, why did you become an organizer, and how long have you been an organizer?
So I initially joined Meetup, I think around May of 2016, just going for find like-minded groups for all types of things, be it cooking. Obviously, I would gravitate towards things that would be code related, since that is, both my career and my passion. And the group Black Men Coding was actually a suggestion by another friend of mine who wanted to start it to go into schools and to potentially kind of start kids out early on and move them in. And obviously Meetup at the time before COVID, people used to meet in person, so you can't meet with children. So that's where the adult component came in. I went to a few of the meetups and I was like, hey, I think we have something here. And he wasn't really interested. And that was around February of 2017. And there was 100 to 200 members at the time. And I kind of took it from there. I took it from those members to kind of what you see now, which I think it's exactly 999 people go and come. I think it's exactly 999 today of those members. But the purpose of it was to identify those who were Black men in the coding space, to make it kind of a safe space to ask questions in the way that they ask questions. I do, which I'm not even sure was mentioned here, I do chair another group called Atlanta Tech Startup, which has about 1,500 people, but it doesn't have the same specific focus as this group, and becoming an organizer of that group was really just about making sure that there was a place available for those men who were in the group, who were, happen to be Black men, to be able to ask their questions in places and spaces they may not be able to ask, which may be deemed as you not know what you're doing, or just may not be as knowledgeable as others. So just having a place to be able to ask those questions. So that's why I became a leader. And the group itself is just kind of, it's unfortunate that it has to exist, but fortunately, I guess I had the foresight to say, hey, let's create something that will function for those who happen to be in this space at this time.
That's amazing, and we got to get you over 1,000. So
yeah,
we got to get you over 1,000. Amy, tell us your meetup story.
So my meetup story started me moving from Massachusetts to New York, and I needed new friends. So I joined Meetup, I put my interest and was able to meet up with various groups and also learn about the city at the same time. So that's my personal meetup story. And that was in 2012. So after that, of going to so many meetup groups and closing, opening up, I decided to create my own in 2018. I found that I was having a lot of these discussions either at work with my coworkers, which went way over lunch period, and also online, which sometimes you just feel like trolling and you're just like having all these like provocative conversations. So I decided why not do this in person? There's a lot of people in New York City in the tri-state area. So I think that I would have at least a good group to discuss all types of things that's particular to women of color. So that's my personal meetup story.
And Amy, we can jump right in. Tell us about your group and tell us about some of your events. And is your group inclusive or exclusive?
So W.O.K.E, Women of Color Empowered, is a group of women that we meet in a safe place to talk about a range of topics. We cover relationships, racism, sexism, work-related stress, sexuality, intersectionality, career, mental health, and current events, pop culture. I like to mix pop culture with politics to, stimulate some, dialogue and thought. I would say it's inclusive and exclusive. And I'll give you just a little background of why. When I was having these discussions at work, usually with women of color, and if there was, white people around, we would whisper, or we were guarded, or we were a little bit restricted in our thoughts and our opinions. So I wanted to create a space where you can not feel restricted, can say your opinion, and not feel like there's repercussions with that. So, I think a great article, and I can post it in the chat, is from an author called Kelsey Blackwell, and she kind of really encompass what woke is really about when it comes to if it's inclusive or exclusive. It's inclusive in the sense that if you identify as a woman of color and if you're a woman, and if you identify as a woman. So I just want to read a quote from her just to kind of give you example of what woke encompasses. So from her article, Why People of Color Need Spaces Without White People, she states, people of color need their own spaces. Black people need their own spaces. We need places in which we can gather and be free from the mainstream stereotypes and marginalizations that permeates every other societal space we occupy. We need spaces where we can be our authentic selves without white people's judgment and insecurity muzzling that expression. We need spaces where we can simply be, where we can get off the treadmill of making white people feel comfortable and finally realize just how tired we are. And that's just the space that I wanted to create. Sometimes that's the only space where we could really speak freely of who we are and express ourselves without being measured or restricted. And that's really what W.O.K.E is really about.
Wow, thank you. That quote was really powerful too. Calvin, tell us a little bit about your group. What are your events like, and is your group exclusive or inclusive, or both?
Calling is not nearly as deep as Amy's. It's somewhat limited to tech and beer, if you drink it. However, we don't meet in person anymore. We stopped, I want to say, maybe, I don't think we did any in 2020. I think if we did, it would have been in January, but our group really was about getting those Black coders together. And I was trying to break because tech is it's just like this large sea of things. You could do so many things in tech. And so I wanted to break those people up into individual groups. And so they work together. Some people have projects, some people have different technologies that they're interested in, and they're at different levels. And so what I wanted to do was pair them together because sometimes tech guys don't necessarily talk to each other. They're not necessarily the most outgoing bunch of people. So my goal was to bring them together to be able to ask questions among themselves. We don't have all the answers with my current staff, so we try to encourage them to talk to each other. When you say inclusive, if you're in tech, you can join. I mean, we have no measurement of people joining the group. However, it must be respected the fact that, I mean, we even have to create a Black coders group in order for it to be safe, for people to ask questions in the way that they ask. And when I say ask it in the way they ask, it's really about cultural expression. The way that people ask questions sometimes has just little cultural nuances in it that's a little bit different. And I think that there was no space to be able to ask those questions. You can look online and Google all of those things, but just the simple way that you type the question sometimes is a little bit different. And having someone who's been there, done that, either through me or any of my staff, was really what the initiative was about. I think that my group as a unit is more of probably 50 smaller groups because everybody's a little different in their technology. We can never get the same people at the same time on a particular topic when we do our Wednesday meetups, which is a free training that I provide, either me or my staff provide every Wednesday. But I do think that it is, to the inclusive question, I think it is inclusive. If you come, you join, you can watch the training, or you can watch the playback on our site, which is blackmencode.tech. However, you have to respect the fact that we even had to create this group in the first place for Black men, because the world is not as inclusive as we would like it to be. So we had to create this space for those Black men to have a safe space to be able to operate.
Definitely, thank you for that. Can you share some success stories from your groups?
So that was a really interesting question. And so we don't follow their lives on our group, meaning people say, hey, I have this issue at my job. Can you cover this on the Wednesday training? And I'm like, sure, I don't even know this tool that you're using, but we figure it out and then we do it and we condense it down into an hour training, if you will. Half of it is about just talking and making sure we're covering the parts of it that they're interested in and giving them feedback on their content. But there are people who we've actually just hired someone from our group, so that's probably a success story for him. But the others, they just really tell us through email, like, hey, that worked, or can you do something else? So I don't know their stories intimately. I just know the things that we get through email. And again, tech guys are not the most talkative bunch, so they don't really, it's not really all the hugs that you may get in other groups. It's more like, I have a question and thanks a lot for helping me out. So we don't necessarily follow their journey, but apparently it's helping because we get all types of emails all the time with the questions and requests.
Absolutely, success comes in all forms. Amy, can you tell us about a success story from your group?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, success comes in all form. Getting emails from members about the group or the topic is a form of success for me. A considerable success for W.O.K.E was in June of 2019. My meetup group was featured in Oprah's magazine, and it featured our topics, and the goal of the focus was on mental health. And it also featured some pictures from our members. So that was pretty cool. It was a 2-page spread in 2019. So that was really huge for us because W.O.K.E was only around for a year at that time. And we were featured. So, and it's of course someone that I genuinely admired. So that's my connection to her now.
And 2-page spread is really impressive.
Right, now I know her, indirectly.
In the same vein, can you share some of the challenges of your group and how you've overcome them?
Well, with New York, space is really limited, and I really wanted to focus on people of color that own their own business. So our first location was in Harlem, because I feel like Harlem is the midpoint from Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, Manhattan. And we were at Harlem Coffee Cafe. And he would close half of the shop for us, the cafe. And that was going really well. And then he didn't want to be a cafe owner anymore. He wanted to go back to his prior field. So I had to find space. And, you know, the criteria of what I'm looking for is very limited. So I ended up finding a space in Harlem called Go Hard Dance. And she's a woman of color, and she also is community focused because she teaches free dance classes to people in the community. So we were able to connect. She was like, we have the same mission. And so we've been since June of 2019, before COVID, BC, we've been there for that location. And I'm hoping to return. The studio is still open. So hopefully with everything, we can really go back into person, because I really do miss that connection of having live dialogue in person.
Definitely. Calvin, can you share some of the challenges from your group and how you might have overcome them?
Okay, so our challenges are different. Our challenges are more around the fact that I'm not even sure what I was thinking at the time, but I signed up to do a weekly training on whatever topic they want. That does not mean that I or anybody that I even remotely know knows anything about it. So to provide something that's high quality, which is really important to me, to a group of people who can pull questions from anywhere, is that within itself is a challenge. Doing it every Wednesday, life is happening, particularly with things like COVID and all of that. There's a lot that people are interested in that doesn't have to do with their careers. People lost their careers looking for new careers. So the amount of questions, as you can imagine, skyrocketed. Like, how do I get into this? That sort of thing. So I think the challenges were more personal for them on that side, if I could point to that. And then for us, just the pace of it. We didn't have any video editors in-house, so keeping up with the demands of even editing out that stuff and getting it back up. I probably have 10 emails now about last week's, which we haven't posted yet. So those are the challenges of keeping it going, but it is really important to people. Like, they're relying on it for something that they're using in their daily lives. Obviously not meeting for COVID, I think the closeness of it, it doesn't always feel real. Everything that's online doesn't always feel real to people when you're simply just online. They're like, oh, I can catch it whenever I want. I can catch the playback. And so they don't get to ask their questions, but they just assume they can email us. And it takes a while sometimes to get back. If you get 15 to 20 emails, because you're trying to group them together. So it doesn't always work. But I think those are the challenges that we have. I love doing it. I love the teaching part of it. So that's not an issue. And we welcome other people to come in if they want to teach and, show, whatever it is that their skill is. But I think that's our challenge, is just keeping up with the demand of what people want to see and doing it in an hour, really 30 minutes on the backside of it.
Yeah, that's a big commitment weekly.
Yeah.
So I want to change gears just a little bit. Last summer, felt very much like the world changed, not just with COVID, but last summer when George Floyd was murdered, signaled a huge change in the world and almost like a catalyst for change in the Black community and change in everything. How did that event change your meetup group? How were your discussions different? Was there a call to action? What happened after that?
I went back and forth after thinking about how this one incident impacted either the group or even me personally, which is what I would have had to draw from. And I think it may have just been the straw that broke the camel's back as far as activism, but I don't necessarily think that his individual situation was the one that changed the group overall. As a person, I obviously live in Atlanta now, but as a person who grew up in the state of Mississippi, that level of anxiety and those types of actions are not unheard of. So, my entire life I've had to deal with that. So having a group of Black men coders, that's why that space has to be created. They share the same anxiety and still have to participate in their day-to-day lives. Imagine having to go to work the next day, right? And being unsure of what this even means for yourself or your safety, your family, things like that. So I don't think that George Floyd's individual situation changed my group. I think that the impact of other people is what mattered. And I also would caution, particularly asking like, how does it change people of color, particularly Black people? How does it change our lives? In that this is something that's like on TV and that people can see, and so it's traumatic regardless. Regardless of which side you fall on, be it the blue side or the person side, it's still traumatic that people are losing their lives on pretty much public television and it's shared millions of times. And so I think that we're all impacted in some kind of way, and to carry that affects us differently, both in the short term and over time. So I would say that we just probably have more of a need for a group that identifies to say to the world, hey, look, we're doing something that's not maybe what you think, because you may not have interacted with Black people before. As you can imagine, I travel the entire world. There are people that still don't know that Black people are in tech, even though India as a country has millions of people who are in tech. I don't know how this is still a thing, but this is still occurring. So I think that having Black men coding is important to kind of change the narrative from things like George Floyd's situation, or at least shine a different type of light. Like, hey, Black men do all types of things. We're not just in this particular position, but you still see yourself in that situation. So I'm always personally impacted, because it's terrible that this is happening to people, what we call human rights violation for anybody, regardless of color.
Amy, can you tell us a little bit about maybe how your group discussions changed?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our topics have incorporated state-sanctioned violence. Before media decided to give coverage to it, it's something that is very particular to us. When we speak on George Floyd's murder and others like him, we talked about in our groups about why are Black women and women of color afterthoughts when it comes to state-sanctioned violence, or mention our flight when it comes to law enforcement. There's a lot of people, I want to say an overwhelming majority, that don't think that Black women's interaction with the police are deadly. So we talk about that. We talk about men who survive state-sanctioned violence and who consoles them, right? The ones that do survive, when they come home, where does that anger and frustration go? CDC has a statistic that Black and Native women have the highest rate of intimate partner violence. Those same two groups also have the highest rate of incarceration and state-sanctioned violence. Native men are killed by police far more than Black men, but that doesn't follow the media's narrative. So you hardly see that mentioned in the news. So we discuss about that. We discuss about those two groups, and does state-sanctioned violence and intimate partner violence, is there a correlation? Do they intersect? And who gets the brunt of that? So we also talk a lot about Breonna Taylor and why she had to be close to perfect in her life story. They showed her a lot with her in her uniform as an EMT worker, an essential worker, just to make the headlines. But she didn't have the elaborate funeral that was on every station for a week like George Floyd did. So we talk about how, women of color are on the forefront of movements and marching and putting themselves out there, but our stories don't get covered. So with George Floyd's murder, we also talk about the impact it has in the community. George Floyd is one person, but there's a lot of us that have negative experiences with law enforcement. Where does that frustration go? And kind of what Calvin was saying with, this is not particular to us, is also when you go to work the next day, how does that feel like? I know for me with George Floyd, all of a sudden diversity committees popped up. There was a list of books that my white colleagues had that we could read all of a sudden. So a lot of it, we talk about how you don't have to do the emotional labor. How to navigate work circles and say, I don't want to talk about it, or this is too much for me. How do I frame it in a way where I'm so respectful, but I don't want to be the teaching moment anymore? So a lot of it is more of just how do I navigate this and how do I, incorporate it in my own personal life. And, speaking of George Floyd, the trials is going to come up. It's within a month. It's going to be very interesting to see if the needle has moved when it comes to, in 2020 versus now. Are we more open about, the inflictions of Black and Brown people in this country? Or is this just going to be another performance by the state? And then these people are going to be let go with like, okay, he just got fired, but he's not going to jail, or, probation or something very light. Are we going to erupt into nationwide protest again? And so it will be very interesting to see how this plays out in the upcoming months.
Definitely. I would imagine that during your discussions and your events, you have moments where you truly realize the impact that you're making on a community. Can you talk a little bit about the very first time that you sat back and you said, wow, I'm changing my community. I'm making an impact here.
I think for me, when W.O.K.E started, I think the first meeting was like 16 people. And then it started growing and we were running out of chairs when we were at the cafe. But another thing that I like is when someone is a meetup member, but brings a friend. Or, our friend says, oh, she couldn't come, but I came because she told me about the group. So when word of mouth is so much more powerful than like advertising or anything like that. So seeing other people bring in people that they care about to the group makes me feel like, wow, this is a need and people dig it. And that makes me like, okay, keep going. You're onto something.
What about you, Calvin?
I'm sorry?
What about you? When was the first moment that you realized the impact that you were having on your community through your group?
I don't have an individual moment. It's just the effects, the after effects of saying, hey, I never knew this was that simple. Or, wow, I never knew that Black people did this on that level. Again, to describe different facets of tech, to know that they're just not, we're not limited to even coding. It would be the equivalent to saying like playing football and somebody being the quarterback, like being the person that thinks and kind of drives the team. The same is kind of true in tech. Being the coder is more like just being a member of the team. And so you never knew that you could be the coach, the owner, and or the quarterback. And so I think that that's an important moment. And they don't always say it. They just always give you this look like, oh, I didn't know that. Sometimes I think it's not true. They're like, yeah, okay. But you can show them products and things that you've done, and it just kind of opens people's eyes. So I don't think I have a one aha moment that I can say, okay, this really impacted people, but the fact that people continue to come back. There's certain people who we like know for sure will always be there, even if it's not related to them, that topic for the week. So I think it's just the energy of knowing that they can, just have somewhere to go for that. But I don't think there's one individual moment. I think it's moment by moment. I think whenever we're doing something that's relevant to them, they're like, wow, this is a good place for me.
And I know you mentioned, Calvin, that sometimes the amount of prep that takes for these weekly meetings can be overwhelming. Are there any other things that you occasionally find overwhelming about organizing that, and how did you overcome that? Or how do you continue to overcome that?
Yeah, that's not so it's not my first language is to talk to groups of people, or particularly strangers, about a topic, because they will ask questions. The preparation, mind you, this is like volunteer. So quality, when you're volunteering is a little bit harder than when you're getting paid to do something. So I think that that's probably my personal struggle. And then the time, I do not always have time. Again, we have offices in LA and Atlanta. So I used to go back and forth so much. I used to have to plan my trips around doing the meetups. I can't just stop doing it because, I want to travel during the middle of the day. So it really impacts my life in that way. And so I think I just measure through the importance that I have for it. But I think those are really like the challenges per se that I've had for, because it really does impact my life. And I look forward to it now.
That's awesome. Amy, any moments that are really overwhelming for you, and how do you overcome that?
It's yesterday I was talking to my spirituality teacher about that, because he was a theater performer, and I'm like, how do you get over like the jitters of when you're speaking in public? So so he gave me some tips and things like that. A lot of it has nothing to do with the group. It's more of just my content and how to present it and how to keep people engaged is kind of like something that I maybe overwork and then realize that like I didn't even need all of these things that I over prepared for. But that's like my formula that I do it every single time, and I end up not even using the material. But as far as the members, they're awesome. They check in on me like, hey, how are you doing? Like, so it's more of like it's an intimate setting. It's more of just my process that can be overwhelming to myself, but not anything in particular to the group, kind of thing. And that I have to like continue to work on for myself. But like, as Calvin said, I love doing it. It keeps me going. It's a great outlet. Just something to separate like what your day-to-day routine is. W.O.K.E and our topics are always engaging, and the comments, the feedback, the dialogue is always interesting. I walk away just like, wow, I didn't even think of it that way. So I love perspective. I love that people can challenge their traditional beliefs and be part of something like this. So,
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about organizing their own group on Meetup?
yeah. Meetup is a big platform, and there are, just like with anything, there's tons of makeup lines, clothing lines, there's different brands of cars. So that if you feel like you have a great idea and it a similar concept to another group, I would still do it. Don't let that hold you back. And one thing, as I've been on Meetup since 2012, there's a lot of groups that shut down, right? So if you can, like hearing Calvin, like I organize my, travel around my group, like that's the kind of commitment that if you're really going to do this, to have, because people really do look forward to it. It is part of, their creative outlets. They're learning from you. So I would say to be committed. I would say give the time to do it. If you need help, get a co-organizer, but really stay consistent to the cause of whatever concept you're having, just to be consistent so that people don't get in love with your concept and then you're like, this meetup is shutting down in 7 days. It's like, what happened? So I would say just stay committed.
And Calvin, besides planning your flights around your meetup event, what advice would you give to someone considering organizing a meetup?
Yeah, you definitely want to consider the impact that it's going to have on your life. I mean, that is no small measure because people are literally depending on you for what you do. Now, if you're like getting together and maybe playing board games, maybe not. But for something like we do, we ask people to ask questions that they're using on their job because hopefully someone else is having that same concern. And so we're really trying to connect the dots with people in their lives. And so I think
Right.
you have to take it seriously. So there is some financial component to it, right? Like you having to show up at certain times every week. There may be different client meetings or things you cannot make, or your evenings. If you have children, you have a family, it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Like, hey, I had to get with this group of strangers, particularly when you were meeting in person and you're paying for things, just to get these people together with no real end in sight. I will continue to do it forever just because I love the teaching part of it. I love to, it's also a challenge too. I always say, I'll tell you everything that I know and I'll still be better at that thing. So it's a little bit of a competitive thing to kind of a little bit higher, but there is a lot to it. There's a lot to it. And Wednesday comes around, like this is the one I had to push off today. I was like, okay, I can't do all of this talking to strangers today. So I had to push the one off today. And I got a ton of emails right after, like, so we're not meeting. So, definitely be interested in the commitment. And, it's not like something you get in return. Like you're not going to some people say thank you, and others is like, okay, great, thanks for the meetup, and then it just hang up. So you should be committed to the cause more so than some form of like social media hype or accolades, because that's probably not going to come. There's not even a like or a review option. People would just say thank you and just move on or just hang up from the content. So definitely be committed to the cause so that you can keep it going for people, or hand it off to someone if you can't keep it going.
Well, we definitely say thank you. We are going to jump into some questions from our amazing audience, and I am going to jump in and ask. All right. Keith Jones asks, does Black Men Coding just focus on coding in the IT world, or can you give us some other components of the group?
Yes, so I'm an enterprise cloud architect, also the founder of the company, but my technical term is enterprise cloud architect. And so we focus on how you approach it more so than the coding itself. So as you know, there are bots and AI things that write code for you now. So, some portions of that will go away for kind of redundant everyday stuff. And so we focus on how you approach it. So being good at approaching it is something that, you can't kind of instinctively add in computer language. And so we focus on the whole person, really, like who you are, what it is that you like doing, and how to navigate that. That's one component of it. But whenever you're doing that thing, what does the best look like? What's the cleanest way that it works with other things? So no, it's not just coding. You can ask any type of question that you want. We do the entire thing. When someone brings us an idea, we push it all the way out. That means whether it's in the App Store, it's a website, it's a component for something, we do the entire thing. So anything in between is open for conversation.
Wow, that's awesome. I have a great question from Matthias, and I'm going to ask it to both of you actually, because I know you both spoke about the commitment that it takes to lead your meetup groups. How many hours a week would you say, or I know Amy, you're monthly, but how many hours would you say you spend in putting together content for your group on a regular basis?
Mine is 4. So
Okay.
2 hours of research and just going through it to make sure it'll fit, because I have to introduce myself and the group and what we're going to cover for the day. So that I give them about 10 to 15 minutes to come in. And then the rest is the training. And so I need it to actually fit in that 30 to 40 minute window. So I have to practice it. So I usually devote 2 hours to that, and then the actual document that shows what we're covering, any type of links or resources. Sometimes there's sample files I have to give out. So I have to actually put that stuff together, load it to our website, the blackmencode.tech website, and make it available beforehand, because when they're there, they're doing it live with us. And so it's about 4 hours a week that I commit to that. Now that I think about it, this is 16 hours. Yeah. So,
What about you, Amy, on average?
I haven't really thought about it in hours, but for as soon as we are finished with the group, I'm already thinking about the next topic. And sometimes our topics are sprung from the dialogue from the group. So once I do that, then I start researching it. How do I make this? Because our groups are 2.5 hours. How do I make this a 2.5 hour dialogue? And also I do the questions as well. So then sending out the emails and social media and all that. So probably, maybe out of the month, maybe 6 to 10 hours of just, perfecting it and sending it out where people understand the topic and not like, what does this mean? And the title, with Meetup, you can only put so much in a title. So how do I make the title catchy so that people are like, okay, I want to join? Because a lot of people don't read the full email. Like studies show, you only read half the email. So I have to put it in there in the first 4 sentences. So so a lot of mine is just the pre-planning part, and then just researching the topic. So maybe on the average 6 to 10 hours for the month.
I did figure that some of your discussion topics would come from the previous discussion, something that comes up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
sometimes if it's we didn't get to it, we'll have a part 2. So there's a few of them, there's a lot of part 2s in it. So
I have a question for you, I'm sorry, Amy from Allie. What advice do you have for women of color in navigating cultural differences into non-accepting communities? And how do you advise them to keep their confidence really high?
Mm. I think that if we, don't operate in shame, if we look at our lives as that this is who I am, this is I'm proud of my culture, I'm proud of my heritage. I don't think that needs an explanation, right? And if there's not, if navigating is it a hostile work environment? Is it them asking you to lead on race discussions, on diversity committees? It's your choice if you want to do that. I caution, women of color of doing that because it is a lot of emotional labor. There's a lot of a pushback. There's going to be a lot of what about this, and I don't know if you have room in your life for that, right? Because once you do all this emotional labor, you still go out in the world as a woman of color and whatever that comes with. So you have to really make a choice when it comes to your self-preservation and mental health. Do you want to do that? So I would look at it as a choice and not an obligation when navigating.
And I have a final question for both of you. How do you see your meetups progressing in the future? And this was from an anonymous attendee.
Um,
Okay. How do I see progressing? I want more of those success stories to come out of it. I want people to be more vocal about how it helps them because that's what other people are drawn to. It has very little to do with me or my organization. Again, there's no financial component to it. And these are things that we already do every day, most of it. So I would really like to see those success stories be the draw for the future organization. Then those who may replace us in doing it. It's really not about us. It's really more important to me that this space exists regardless. And, I work with other Black groups that are doing similar things outside of Meetup. And, some charge for people to get in and all that. And that's just something I just really didn't want to do. And so I think it's just really important that it outlives even my ideals for it. I have an initiative to bring 1 million Black coders into the space, which I started in 2020. And so that's really what it's about, is to bring people into that space and for them to have a resource for that. And so since it didn't exist, I think it was, I can't remember who said it, but when something doesn't exist, it's your obligation to create it. So that's what I did.
That's amazing. What about you, Amy?
for me, if you ever go on W.O.K.E's page, it really started with me witnessing my mother and her friends and how they would meet after church and just talk and have dialogue, and they would do it every week. So Meetup for me is I wanted to role model healthy relationships. I wanted to destigmatize mental health and mental health access. I wanted them to see someone who practiced therapy, that this is how it can look like. And I also wanted, we live in a world that's very competitive when it comes to gender, especially with women. And I wanted to show that you can have a healthy relationship with women. You can build friendships with women. And what I love about W.O.K.E, after our meetup, I leave about 15 to 20 minutes of just like networking with other women. Sometimes the owner's like, you gotta go, like, because we're just like talking and exchanging numbers and things like that. I want women to have women friends. I want women to trust women. And a lot of our groups require some vulnerability. And once there is vulnerability, then the bonding takes place. And it's the feeling of trust and a safe place. So that's my goal of Meetup. At first I was like, oh, I want Meetup in every state. That's not like maybe one day, but most of it is like, I want you to be able to learn what you learn in our group and just practice it in your daily life to improve your quality of life. And that's my goal.
Well, thank you so, so, so much, both Calvin and Amy, for sharing your experiences as a meetup organizer. Before we go, I'd love to share my screen again. There we go. I'd like everyone to pull out their phones we launched Meetup's first ever podcast, Keep Connected, with our Meetup CEO, David Siegel. You'll hear from community experts and organizers who through Meetup have impacted their community. The 4th episode with Meetup organizer David Good is launching next Wednesday. And then of course, we wanna thank you, Calvin. Thank you again, Amy, for participating today. It was so awesome speaking with you. And I hope that this inspired someone to go out there and either join your group, create their own group. If you'd like a recording and a recap of this event, you can go onto our Community Matters blog at meetup.com/blog. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.